Hello all, this is part 3 of the lecture series for Module 6 on marijuana. The first two lectures covered an introduction to the substance, how it's absorbed and eliminated from the body, the short and long-term effects, and for this module we'll be talking about dependence and withdrawal as well as marijuana in the DSM. Generally, it's accepted that there is no physical dependence that happens with chronic marijuana use. However, there is observed and reported withdrawal symptoms. And if you'll recall from our very first unit, withdrawal is what happens when someone becomes dependent on a substance and then that substance is taken away. And so there's an interesting phenomenon that happens here where people do report withdrawal symptoms when they stop using marijuana after a period of very heavy use. But also there is no physiological evidence of marijuana dependence forming. We don't really know what to make of that, and researchers are still trying to figure out more about that. What we do know is that there is a tendency to develop a psychological dependence on marijuana. And what that means is it's a desire to continue to use marijuana despite the consequences that it might be causing to the user, and that people can experience cravings for the substance over time after using it chronically. As I mentioned, cannabis withdrawal is something that's so well documented, and it's in fact included in the DSM. So after stopping cannabis use that was heavy and prolonged, so like daily or almost daily, any three of the following being present, and that would be irritability, nervousness, sleep difficulty, decreased appetite, restlessness, depressed mood. So you're seeing, again, for withdrawal, the opposite of what intoxication looks like. And then also at least one physical symptom, so abdominal pain, shakiness, sweating, fever, chills, or headache. So that kind of flu-like withdrawal symptoms. We'll talk a bit about some of the medical uses of marijuana. So synthetic THC, THC that's made in a lab, it's not made from the cannabis plant, is actually a Schedule III drug, which means that it has a medical use, an established medical use, a safety procedures around the medical use, and not as intense, no physical withdrawal and less intense no physical dependence and less intense psychological dependence than Schedule 1 or 2 drugs. However, THC that's derived from the cannabis plant is Schedule 1, which means there's no accepted medical use for the drug. For synthetic THC, there's evidence that it helps with nausea and vomiting. It also helps with cachexia, which is wasting syndrome. It's the bodily integrity breakdown associated with HIV and cancer. And so marijuana can help with that syndrome in terms of weight gain and stimulating the appetite. But it's a tricky balance because marijuana also does suppress the immune system. And so in something like HIV, where there is a lowering of the immune system in response to other HIV drugs, it can really just kind of compound the problem for people who are taking it. Marijuana is also useful in the treatment of glaucoma. It relieves the eye pressure that's associated with the disease glaucoma. It's unclear how that actually happens. There's research still being done. And then there's some other areas of use that it may be helpful for: muscle spasms and convulsions, insomnia, high blood pressure, asthma, anxiety, and depression. I mean, people are doing a ton of research trying to understand how THC and marijuana might be used medically. Cannabis intoxication is included in the DSM-5, and the only two of the four symptoms, according to the DSM, are bloodshot eyes, increased appetite, dry mouth, or tachycardia, which is increased heart rate. So those are the only physiological symptoms of cannabis intoxication that are needed to meet DSM criteria. There are other diagnoses associated with cannabis in the DSM. So having cannabis intoxication or having a psychotic disorder induced by cannabis that includes either delusions or hallucinations. Delusions would be strongly held irrational beliefs, and hallucinations would be disruptions in sensations or perceptions. Cannabis-induced anxiety disorder, or some other kind of cannabis-induced mental illness, all covered in the DSM. And then there's two kind of unique issues to cannabis I wanted to touch on. One is this debate around whether or not cannabis is a gateway drug. So does someone, because it's the most commonly used illegal drug in the United States, does someone using cannabis mean that they're also going to end up using harder drugs? And the reality is that that's not the case. So it is true that most people who use heavier drugs have also used marijuana at some point. But the vast majority of people who use marijuana do not go on to use other drugs. So it's kind of just a one-way relationship where, yeah, heavy drug users probably also used marijuana, but people who use marijuana not necessarily going to go on to use heavy drugs. And then in the US, we have this interesting phenomenon with cannabis, which is that it's being decriminalized and legalized at the local and state level while it remains illegal at the federal level. So decriminalization is a step before legalization. It does not legalize the drug. What it does is it turns it from a criminal charge to a civil charge. So it doesn't become a crime, it becomes a violation similar to like a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. You might have to pay a fine, you might get a citation, but there's no criminal charges, no conviction happening in a decriminalized state. On the other hand, legalization means the substance is legal to use. You will not get fined or cited for having it in your possession. And that can either be for medical purposes only, so it's legal as long as you have a prescription and it's your prescription, or it can be legalized fully across the board recreationally, usually with an age restriction. And that's the case in a couple of states now. And so those, I just wanted to make the distinction between those. I think that's very important to be aware of in terms of understanding your risk for use. And that's it for Module 6.